Welcome to the Sound of Resistance channel. Russia is paying a heavy price for the invasion of Ukraine. The cost of the war in Ukraine smashed Russia's back. Russian leader Putin is having trouble finding funds. It was a matter of curiosity how long Russia will continue to the war in Ukraine under these economic conditions. Many of the decisions Russia made in the occupation in Ukraine were of nothing but harm to Russia. In particular, the decision taken by Russian leader Putin in critical times of the war in Ukraine and the consequences it brought to Russia were the subject of discussion. Russian leader Putin has taken a series of measures in recent months to prevent the damage that the Russian army has seen in the conflicts in Ukraine and to heal the wounds. However, there was one element that Putin ignored for the measures taken. The measures Putin took in the military field did not only affect the Russian army in Ukraine. All of Russia was under influence of Putin's decision. So, how did Putin's decision affect such a wide audience? One of the most impressive factors is Russian leader Putin's declaration of mobilization. With the mobilization announcement announced by Putin in the past months, thousands of soldiers joined the Russian army in Ukraine. The newly mobilized Russian soldiers joining the Russian army and the Russian men fleeing the mobilization caused some problems. The first of these problems was the departure of the Russian people from their country after the mobilization announced by Putin. The economic balances were turned upside down as Russian men fled from Russia. Hundreds of thousands of Russians leaving their jobs in their country means that trade comes to the standstill. Another factor affecting the economic balance in Russia was the Russian reserve soldiers. Russian reservists put a heavy burden on the Russian economy. The Russian economy, in its current state, is not sufficient to meet the needs of the troops in Ukraine. Russian leader Putin is trying to take steps to change the bad economic conditions, but the sanctions imposed on Russia for the occupation in Ukraine are blocking it. The Russian economy is officially a nightmare for Putin. Russia's GDP fell 4% in the third quarter of the year, dealing a major blow to Vladimir Putin and his ability to wage war on Ukraine. The trump cards that Russian leader Putin could use in the war in Ukraine were in trouble. Russia entered recession in the third quarter of this year and its GDP fell by 4%, according to a statistical agency research on the Russian economy. The Russian economy has suffered a major slump in trade after pro-Ukrainian forces imposed sweeping and devastating sanctions over the invasion of Ukraine. The Russian economy has also been hit hard, with hundreds of thousands of Russians, many believed to be highly skilled workers, leaving the country after Putin announced a partial mobilization in response to heavy casualties in Ukraine. Liam Perch, a senior market analyst, commented on the Russian economy. Liam Perch said, "In the latest monthly data on the Russian economy, there is a little sign that a sustainable recovery is in place. We think that the recession and the cost of the Russian embargoes may deepen in the fourth and first quarters due to the recent mobilization of the Russian reserve forces." Economists said that in the third quarter of the year, imports to China, Belarus, and Turkey increased rapidly and Russia's banking sector stabilized. However, Mr. Perch said the outlook for the Russian economy is still gloomy, even though it appears to have stabilized in the third quarter of the year. The latest data for September show that activity in the Russian economy has stabilized rather than recovered. The mobilization of reserve forces in September could cause a sharp drop in demand in Q4. It is predicted that sanctions will hit the Russian economy in the blow in the coming months. The EU embargo on imports of crude oil and petroleum products to Russia will hit industry and exports in Russia next year. We think that it will not be until at least mid-2023 that the Russian economy begins a sustainable recovery. The Russian economy grew by 3.5% on an annual basis in the first quarter of 2022. The effect of sanctions on the Russian economy was not yet felt in the first quarter of 2022. The Russian Economy Ministry has made predictions about how the Russian economy will take shape for 2023. Russia's Economy Ministry forecasts GDP to fall by 2.9% this year. while the central bank expects a 3 to 3.5% decline before returning to grow in the second half of 2023. However, doubts exist about whether Putin's economic woes are truly dominating, as the Kremlin tries to hide potential missteps and weaknesses. A research institution using unconventional data sources made a claim about the Russian economy in August, stating that Russia only publishes data that is more relevant and selectively discards unfavorable metrics. He said that Russia shares carefully selected figures when explaining economic data. An in-depth analysis of the key figures from Russia's shared economic data showed that nearly 40% of Russia's GDP is threatened with disappearance as businesses pull out and put more than 5 million jobs at risk. The Kremlin is afraid to release data that reveals the full scale of its economy's collapse. Another claim said, according to data from a major research company, Western sanctions have made public that more than 1,000 companies from around the world voluntarily cut their activities in Russia, including the country's leading pharmaceutical companies, energy companies, companies with large consumer portfolios. The economic value of the voluntary restrictions is estimated to exceed $600 billion, meaning that withdrawal within a 3-month period almost alone reversed Russia's 3 decades of economic integration with the rest of the world. The economic effects of the ongoing Ukrainian-Russian war in Ukraine began to be seen in France for the first time in the world. The French people flocked to the streets of Paris to protest the rapid rise in oil prices. French demonstrators set fire to the streets of Paris in order to make their voices heard for French President Macron, causing traffic to be blocked for a while. The intervention of the French police against the demonstrators was harsh, and many demonstrators were arrested and taken to the police station. Russia is trying to take the steps to correct the economic data. A United Nations official said the UN was cautiously optimistic that a wartime agreement will be renewed, allowing Ukraine to export over 11 million metric tons of wheat and Russia to ship grain and fertilizer to world markets. In the statement made regarding to developments regarding the wheat export, UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres said that discussed the extension of the agreement with Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov at the Group 20 summit held in Bali, Indonesia this week, and found the meaning very positive. The agreement established the Black Sea shipping corridor and inspection process, which was approved on July 2020 through separate agreements with Russia and Ukraine, is scheduled to expire on Saturday. UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres said the agreement was critical in addressing a global food crisis following Russia's February 24th invasion of Ukraine, warning that shortage and prices will skyrocket if not extended. Russia's ambassadors to the UN complained last month that more needed to be done to facilitate grain and fertilizer exports. Under separate agreements brokered by United Nations and Turkey, the agreement will be extended for another 120 days unless Moscow and Kyiv object. Hearing that the agreement, which will affect the whole world, will be extended was welcomed by everyone. He thinks that with the extension of the Grain Corridor Agreement, the ongoing war between Russia and Ukraine will somewhat reduce its effects on the world. However, the Russian economy will come to the brink of collapse unless a new formula is found. Putin is paying the price for the decision he made during the fight against Ukraine, and together with Putin, they are partners in paying the bill all over Russia. Thank you for watching us.